And welcome, welcome, welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So we are, of course, getting into chapter 6, which is about Noah. And at this point, God is seeing how corrupt the world has become, tragically, and whether or not we are living in parallel times. But I suspect that, well, perhaps, more or less, this is something that the Torah wants us to recognize as human beings, as our imperfections, because if we don't recognize our imperfections, we can't ever get them better. We'll never heal ourselves. So let's go into this right now. So, Vayar Elohim et haaretz, the Elohim, God, saw the land, the earth, v'hinei nishchata, and behold, it had become corrupted. Doesn't define it, and the Rashi and, of course, Torah Temimah and our rabbinic interpreters will try to be more specific as to the nature of this corruption. Ki hishchit kol baser et darko al haaretz, for all flesh had corrupted its way upon the earth. So, kol basar. So here we are talking about, it says all flesh, all flesh. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, said Rabbi Yochanan. He's a name we might have become familiar with. He is a major, major player in the Talmud. Give me one moment here. Let me see what's going on here. Let me take care of this here. Sorry, let's see here. Uh, okay, very good. So he says, Milamed, what this teaches you, this incredible corruption, the entire flesh says, and that's the point he's making it on. Melamed shehirbiu behema al chaya. They caused let's say, domesticated animals to copulate, to breed with wild animals. V'chaya al behema, and wild animals on domesticated animals. V'hakol al adam, and all of them on man. V'adam al kol, and human beings on all other animals. So let's take a look here at what Torah Temimah has to tell us. Here we are. Pashut, it's clear. The medayek milashon kol basar, that he's drawing this out from the fact that it says all flesh. Shekolel kol habruim, because that would include all creatures, all creatures. Ulechora, but however, on looking at this again, Sarifiyun, we need to look at this more carefully. Dahamatzinu, because we find Bechama Makomot in several places, Shem Kol Basar, that this noun Kol Basar, right, all flesh, Shem Mekavein Ach V'Rak L'Adam, that in fact it refers only and simply to human beings, right? And he gives the examples. Kamo yavo kol basar lishtachovot lefanai. In the book of Isaiah, chapter 66, it says, all flesh will come to prostrate themselves before me. Talking about human beings. Vaya bayomahu, and it shall be on that day, eshpoch et ruchi, I will pour out my spirit, al kol basar, on all flesh, from the prophet Joel. Prophet Joel. So again, referring to human beings. Shomei Tefillah, and in fact we have in the book of Psalms, Psalm 65, Shomei Tefillah, O one who hears prayer, Adecha kol basar yavo, to you all flesh will come, and it's talking about human beings. Incidentally, if you're not muted, please double check, make sure you're muted. Uchedome, there are similar examples. V'yesh lomar, however, one could answer, the shani hacha, that this situation is different. The inyan more, because the whole subject teaches it indicates the ka'e al kol habrim, that it actually is talking about all creatures. Why? How do we know? Shahare sof maaseh shebe'emet ne'evdu unitpa'u. Because honestly, right, uh, in the end, at the end of the story, everything was lost and drowned, Vamabul, in the flood, Kol Habrim, all creatures. So that's why they were all being punished. Va'al Amar, and regarding this, the Holy One, blessed be He, said, Kates Kol Basar Balafanai. And that's why, a little later on, he's going to say, the end of all flesh comes before me, and there it means all the creatures. The im kain, and if this is the case, halashon kol basar, this term kol basar, parshazo, that is in this particular paragraph, more meforash, that it explicitly is indicating al kol habrim, regarding all creatures. V'Iyin od, and check further, Masha Katavnu, what we wrote, Hashayach Lidrashazo, that which pertains to this interpretation, Lekaman, below, the Pasuk in the verse that says, Me Adam va'ad behema, where it says, from human beings until up to the cattle. In other words, it's an example of taking the extremes um, and referring to everything. It's a figure of speech. So, having said that, I have to tell you that I've thought also why it is that all the that all the animals were killed as well. And quite honestly, even though we have Rabbi Yochanan's interpretation, which is saying that the corruption, right, the corruption was complete, that nevertheless, even if it had just been human beings who had corrupted themselves, even if we wanted to understand Kol Basar as meaning all the human beings and not to include the animals, that as I understand the point that the Torah is making, is that our role here as human beings and as stewards of the earth, right, that it was all created, God created all these different elements of the universe for our sake, for our sake. And so if we were no longer worthy, everything would get destroyed. And the truth is, of course, that we see today, if we accept the concept of climate change, if we know for a fact, which we do, that certain species have been annihilated, they're extinct because of human behavior in various kinds of ways, that would certainly in some ways support what I think the Torah is trying to tell us. But here, I don't think we're limited to only one interpretation. And I think, the point that Torah Temimah makes in analyzing Rabbi Yochanan's statement, of course, is very, very interesting. And that makes a good point. So, is that what's going on these days? Look at our attitude about these sorts of things. So, something to think about, right? Vayomer Elohim, back into the text. Vayomer Elohim, God said, Noach to Noah. And here's that phrase, we just referred to it. Kates kol basar balafanai. And this certainly seems to indicate, I have to admit, that it refers to all, when it says all flesh, it's referring to animals as well, to all the creatures has come before me. Why? Haaretz chamas mipnehem, because the earth has become filled with violence on account of them. We will get a better sense of all this in a little bit. So it uses the word Hamas, right, as opposed to how it became corrupt, right? Vehineni mashchitam et haaretz, and behold, I will destroy them together with the earth. So let's take a look. Here we go. Kimal'ah, for the earth has become filled with violence. And again, we have Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said, Bo'ur'eh, come and look. Kama gadol kocha shel Hamas, right? So look and see just how powerful violence or pillage is, to what degree it has an effect, right? So let's go on. Why? What's the proof? Sha'arei dor hamavul avru, because if you look at things, right, the generation of the flood transgressed all regarding hakol, regarding everything. They were so corrupted, right? V'lo nichtam alehem gzar dinam, but their decree wasn't sealed al shepashtu yedehem b'gazel, until they stretched out their hands in robbery, in pillage. Shneemar, as it states, ki mal'ah, because, right, because the earth has become filled with Hamas, with violence, pillage, mipnehem, on their account. V'hinini machshikam et haaretz, and behold, I will destroy them along with the earth. So, Torah Temimah here. Lo nitpa'er. It's not so clear. Lama be'emet gadol kol kach kocha shel Hamas. Why the strength, right, the power of violence of Hamas is so strong. Why is it so significant? Right, maybe that's the better word to use. Mikocha shel arayot. Well, we've already discussed the fact that they were involved in sexual corruption. How do we know that it's more serious, more significant than the sin of sexual corruption? V'halo avon arayot, and not only that, the sin, right? The sin of arayot, of sexual corruption, hu echad mihadvarim. It's one of those things. Sheyehareg ve'al ya'avor alehem. It's one of the three things for which we are supposed to accept death rather than to transgress those things. What are the three things? It's idolatry, right? Avodah zara, idolatry. It is shfichut damim. It is bloodshed. In other words, or erva, right? Or to commit incest or some other sexual corrupt act. And essentially, we're talking about a situation. What's the situation? We're talking about a situation where someone comes and says to you, and they're a very powerful person, and they say to you, you are to lie with so and so, right? To commit some sexual perversion, or perform an act of idolatry, or kill someone else. And if you don't, I will kill you. Because we know that in general, every law in Judaism may be transgressed in the case of a life-threatening situation. But these three things are an exception. And Hamas is not included in that, right? It only the three things specifically have to do with sexual perversion and idolatry and bloodshed. The ifshaloma. So how do you respond to this? The ifshaloma, and you could say al pima de amar b'midrash rabbah. You could say on the basis of what is mentioned in the midrash rabbah, parshazu, regarding this particular parsha. Right, the midrash rabbah is organized according to, at least the midrash rabbah on the Torah is organized according to the parshiot. Right, so it's chapter 38. Uva Masechet Derech Eretz, and there's what are called minor Masechtot. That Derech Eretz, of course, means human decency, common human behavior. It also can refer, Derech Eretz can also refer to having relations, the intimate relations we have, right? That's also a Derech Eretz is sometimes translated and understood that way, the way of the world. Zuta means little, minor. Perek Tet, this would be chapter 9. Gadol
Yes,
Hashem. This, yeah, go ahead. Did you want to say something?
yes. Is derech eretz related to halacha, the way to walk?
It's more, I think it's sort of it in a way, I've always understood it as meaning common human decency, right? But it does mean literally the path
Deep.
of the earth, the path of the earth, literally.
Okay.
Right, because derech, but it can mean the way. Derech can also mean way, both in the English sense, right? Because way can mean a path, but it can also mean a way of behavior, right? So it has that double entendre also in Hebrew. Did you want to follow up with anything on that?
No, I've always thought that about derech eretz.
Yeah, yeah.
I know what it means is, act
Right.
like a man.
Right. Yep. But it does, a lot of people don't realize that sometimes it's really specifically about intimate relations. That's what it's about. But we certainly can broaden it, right? But very often it means specifically that, the act of intimacy. At any rate, in this Masechet, it says, God, and also in the Midrash Rabbah, Gadol HaShalom, it says, great is peace. Peace is great. She'afilu Yisrael, because even if Israel, Ovdim Avodah Zarah, because even if they are worshiping idols, the Shalom Beinehem, and there is peace amongst them, they're getting along together. Omer HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He, says, Kiviyachol, as it were, Ein ani yachol lishlot bahem. I have no power, I have no jurisdiction over them. Shneimar, as it states, and the proof is from the prophet Hosea, chapter 4. It says, Chibur Atzabim Ephraim. Ephraim, referring to the 10 tribes, the northern 10 tribes, are a band of idol worshippers. Heinachlo, leave him alone. Leave him alone. But this idea of chibur, right? A band, people, the word chaver, right? A friend, same thing. In other words, they're all united in this. Aval, however, this is going on with that quote from Bereshit Rabbah or Parsha Derech Eretz Zuta. Aval, but Misha Nechlaku, but once they are in division, right? They don't get along. Mahu Omer, what does God say? And this is actually in a different chapter, I believe, of Hosea. Chalak libam, right? So machloket, right? Their hearts. The translation that I found was said their hearts are fickle, but chalak, and it could mean that. But we also have the idea of machloket, which means a disagreement, right? Their hearts are in disagreement one with another. Ata yeshamu. Now they will be held guilty. Adkan. That's the end of that quote from Derech Eretz Zuta or Midrash Rabbah. Ulefize, and so according to that principle, Kol's man, as long as Shelo Gazlu, as long as they weren't involved in robbery, the Chamsu, okay, as long as they didn't rob and they weren't violent, V'haya shalom beinehem, and there was peace amongst them. Lachen lo nenshu. For that reason, as Rabbi Yochanan is saying, the edict was not sealed, right? Their fate was not sealed. They were not punished. Lo nenshu. They weren't punished. Aval mikevan shepashtu yidehem begezel. But the moment they started to stretch out their hands in robbery, Shezeh gorem lemachloket, because clearly robbery creates tremendous division amongst people, v'sin'ah, and hatred. Az ne'eshmu, then they were held guilty. V'ne'enshu al kol averot shehayu beyadam mikodem, and they were now punished regarding all the transgressions that were in their hands prior to that. In other words, it all now fell apart. V'yein od, and check further. Masha katavnu ba'inyan, what we wrote regarding drasha zu, this particular interpretation. Barosh perik tetzai, at the beginning of Parsha Ki Tetzai in Deuteronomy. The pasuk regarding the verse that says, Ki ish bin sorer umoreh, if a man has a stubborn and rebellious son, bidrasha ben velo bat, regarding there it says ben, and it says son and not a daughter. So again, that particular halacha is discussed later on in Deuteronomy regarding the stubborn and rebellious son. It only includes a son and not a daughter. A daughter can be stubborn and rebellious, but all the laws involved in treating that stubborn and rebellious son are not applied to a daughter.
Is that because main ways that a daughter can be rebellious is sexual?
Um, that's an interesting question. I'm sure a man can be certainly as well. It it talks specifically about a glutton and a drunkard, okay? And the rabbis, sort of pull apart what that is, and basically, interestingly enough, it talks about him becoming a robber. Women aren't involved. I don't know of too many highway women. I mean, I'm not saying they don't exist. I think we had Bonnie and Clyde. Bonnie was certainly a woman, but she was doing it with a man. Uh, I think the rabbis were very uncomfortable with this halacha as to what they do, the consequences of a child like that. And they say things like this never actually happened. And the truth is that I do believe that many of the laws in the Torah are there to teach us, you know, not to say that they weren't carried out, but the truth is unless it's a really corrupt government, nobody wants to punish people, right? I mean, if a judge wants to punish the people who come to his court, he should be removed as a judge. You do it because you have to. You do it because justice demands it, but not because you take personal pleasure in seeing people getting punished. So they didn't want they took the wording of the Torah, right, and took it very literally, and so didn't apply it to women. Is this answering your question, Judith, or do you want to
Yeah.
take it away? Okay, that's my sense of it. All right, here we go. We have not finished. Veda, and know, the Katav Rashi, that what Rashi wrote, the Pasuk Zeh, which he wrote regarding this, in other words, the commentary we've already read at some point, right? Regarding this verse, B'Shem Midrash Rabbah, in the name of the Midrash Rabbah, Kates Kol Basar, the end of all flesh, Kol makom, this is what he says, right? Kol makom she'ata motzeh nut v'arodah zara. In every place where you find immorality, right, or and idolatry, adrolomusia, and he says adrolomusia means confusion, right? I think it definitely comes a Greek word. Andros means human beings. Musia, I don't know that Greek but I have understood androlomusia as meaning wholesale destruction, right? Ba'a olam comes to the world, comes into the world. And here he describes what adrolomusia means. V'horeget tovim v'ra'im. And it kills the good and the bad, right? That it makes no distinction between good and bad when there is wholesale immorality and idolatry. There's no and that could be the musia, right? The confusion of people in the sense that all get punished. There's no distinction made between the good and the bad. Ulichora. And so on the surface, tzarich we need to look at this more carefully. B'daha, because kafi hamavuar b'chol parsha, because as is explained in the entire parsha of Noach, haya az kol ha'olam b'madregat rishayim. The entire world was in fact on the level of wicked people, right? There weren't any good people, right? V'chemoshe katav ki hishchit kol basar, and just as it wrote, it says all flesh, right, became corrupted. V'lo hayu tovim klal, so there weren't any good people around. V'im kein menale lahasmich drasha zo lakan. So what right did Rashi have to give such an explanation here? What confusion is there if everybody's bad? Right? There's no confusion. Everybody's bad. They're all getting punished. However, it would appear, al pi katav b'Sanhedrin, regarding what was written in the tractate Sanhedrin, page 108a, the Noach matzachen, regarding the phrase that says, but Noah found grace. Af al Noach nichtam gzar din. Noah was also uh, part of this edict, right? This edict to destroy human beings. Ella shemat sachin. But however, he was an exception. He was given grace. And we know that grace refers to undeserved blessing, right? Undeserved mercy. Vehine al Noach he'id hakatuv. And regarding Noah, the scripture has said, right? It's testified, shayat tzaddik tamim, that he was a tzaddik tamim, that he was a perfectly righteous person. Right, so under normal circumstances, right? Okay, so let me keep going. The imkain, and for this, and if this is the case, kasher, there's a difficulty. Lama nechtam gam alav gzar din. Why? Why does it say he too should have been killed in the flood? Right? He should. He was a perfectly righteous person. Well, there we go. Okay. Ela mishum de androlamusia ba'alalam. But because, as Rashi points out, there's this whole confusion, good and bad are included in the same fate. V'horeget tovim v'ra'im, and it kills both the good and the bad, v'dok and that QED. In other words, the way the argument is going is that despite the fact that Noah, that scripture testifies that Noah was a righteous man, he also was going to be killed and drowned in the flood, right? And the reason he wasn't in that situation where Androlomusia was taking place was because he found grace. That it was the grace, simply by dint of the grace of God, that he was singled out to survive, and he didn't succumb to the flood like everyone else, despite the fact that he was a good person, because at that particular moment, when there's such a matter of idolatry and sexual immorality, Androlomusia is there in the land, and that's the proof. And we will stop right here. Okay, so let me take this down and see here, and I will mark it up for next time. Okay. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to stop the share. And oh, wow, so nice to see all of you here. That's wonderful. Okay. Any points before I stop the recording? Okay.